And yes, John, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Gary, for that intro, and thanks for the invitation to participate in this symposium. For those of you who don't know, Gary and I crossed paths many years ago back at MIT. We both got our starts in picosecond, femtosecond laser spectroscopy back in the days when that was hot stuff, and continue to work in that area a little bit, but drifted around to other topics. And one of those I'll share with the group here today on semiconductor nanomaterials for sustainable electronics, specifically electronics that are uniquely characterized by their ability to dissolve in water and in biofluids. And so I'll start a little bit with a motivation and try to give you some perspectives on what we're trying to accomplish here, a little bit of context, and then kind of transition into a description of the classes of materials that we've been able to put together to support this kind of technology, give you a sense of how they come together in various component level devices. But then the second half of the talk is really kind of focused at the system level. One, focusing on applications in healthcare, particularly temporary implants that provide wireless stimulation for accelerating the healing processes associated with damaged peripheral nerves, and for pacing the heart following cardiac surgery. And then the very tail end of the talk, we'll cover some topics that are a little bit more exploratory, really revolving around the idea of taking these body interfaced sensors and stimulators and trying to figure out how to disperse them into the environment at scale to measure the health of our environment. Kind of conceptually similar to the way that we're using related devices to measure health of the human body. And so, as Gary mentioned, I'm here at Northwestern University. My home department is material science and engineering, but we do other kinds of engineering as well. So I have joint appointments various places, and that interface to the clinical community is very, very important, especially for this first area of application in biomedical implants that are bioresorbable. So just as a broader context, you can think about where all of this work kind of fits into the dominant future for electronics, which is one that's been driven primarily by making transistors smaller, packing more and more of them into a unit area, increasing their operating speeds, decreasing their power consumption. And that kind of Moore's Law type of trend in this class of technology has also opened up qualitatively new areas of application over time, starting with industrial and military purposes, primarily evolving to personal gadgetry and wearables of various sorts. And I think this trend in electronics will continue, even if scaling has run out as a pathway to improvement. There's all kinds of clever approaches in 3D integration and so on. And so I think smaller, faster, cheaper will continue to be exciting future over time. But we've been thinking about a future is a little bit different, one that's characterized by a feature of electronics that's opposite to one that has been a dominating engineering goal in conventional electronics, which is the ability to dissolve and disappear, without a trace over time. And that's quite a bit different. I mean, transistor technology in the very earliest days was attractive because it's a solid state technology. And so you can engineer the componentry and the integrated circuits, in principle, if you're careful about it, to essentially last forever. And I think, the global engineering community has done an excellent job in any kind of practical sense, kind of realizing that goal. I mean, your microprocessor chips, your memory chips, for the most part, don't wear out. And so they kind of last forever. And that's great in a lot of ways. And it was a dominating concern when transistors were being developed to replace vacuum tubes for telecommunication equipment, where you really wanted, the hardware to last forever. But if you think about the way that electronics has evolved, to the present time, your cell phone is a great example of a device that you don't want to last forever, because you want to be able to upgrade to the new version, every 2-3 years. And the fact that the hardware is designed to last forever has an adverse consequence associated with that in terms of management of solid electronic waste. And so maybe in that context, also in some other application areas, having a form of electronics that is physically transient and designed to go away and disappear after a period of stable operation aligned with a particular application requirement might be interesting as a different type of electronics, and I think maybe relevant to the sustainability theme that is kind of guiding this particular workshop. And so that's the vision: is how do you create water soluble electronics that dissolve into environmentally and biologically compatible end products, to think about that. And that sort of water soluble electronics, I think, is kind of a subset of a broader class of technology that we refer to as transient electronics, according to this definition, which is any electronic system that can partly dissolve or resorb or otherwise physically disappear at a programmed rate or at a triggered time. That would be different than conventional electronics, opening up different sorts of application opportunities. And what are those envisioned applications? Well, here are 5 examples. I've touched on the first 2, which is this idea of reduced or completely eliminated solid electronic waste associated with discarded consumer electronic devices. And that's a pretty daunting goal, but maybe something to think about in the context of this new technology. The other one is in this notion of temporary implants. So engineering forms of medicine, I guess you could think about them in that way. Devices that go inside the body, provide a therapeutic or diagnostic function aligned to a time scale of a natural biological process, say wound healing, for example, and then simply disappear, dissolve, and melt away into the body after the wound healing is completed and the devices are no longer needed, and their continued presence would otherwise represent unnecessary device load on the patient and risk to their health going forward. And so the ability to kind of dissolve and disappear away without the need for a secondary surgical extraction process might be pretty interesting. So kind of analogous to a resorbable suture, but now embodying full electronic functionality. And so sort of parallel to that, and I'll touch on this in the very last part of my presentation, would be sensors and temporary diagnostic systems that could be deployed into the environment to monitor remediation of a spill, for example, and you wouldn't need the sensors over a longer time period. And so the ability to sort of disperse them into the environment at scale, but without the need to go out into the field and recover them might be interesting. Now, the last 2, I won't say much about this, but these actually served as the basis for the funding that we were awarded to develop this technology in the first place, and that is in the realm of hardware level security for sensitive military electronic systems through DARPA. And so that represented sort of a catalyzing grant that got us started, but we're not super active in those last 2 areas, and what we are doing, I can't share with the group. So I'm going to just focus on items 2 and 3 in this presentation. And so the question is, how do you even begin to make progress in that direction? And specifically, what are you going to use for the semiconducting component of these water-soluble electronic devices? And I think initially when we got started, we were thinking that maybe semiconducting polymers or organics of some type might be attractive because they embody all of the chemical versatility that you have available in the world of polymers. There are semiconducting polymers, and so you can maybe engineer a semiconducting polymer to undergo hydrolysis when exposed to water, and that seemed like maybe a promising direction to go. But all organic semiconductors are relatively low performance electronic materials compared to silicon, for example. And it just so happened that we were very interested in nanoscale forms of silicon in the context of the work that we were doing in flexible electronics. And so we developed various synthetic and sort of top-down approaches to nanostructured elements of device-grade silicon, as illustrated here in the form of these silicon nano ribbons developed by etching the near-surface regions of device-grade silicon wafers. And those nanostructures were interesting to us for their mechanical properties, and you could integrate those ribbons and membranes and wires and so on with flexible plastic substrates to build high performance flexible electronics. But what turned out to be the case, and we sort of just stumbled across this, is that if you take those nanostructured sheets and ribbons of silicon, and if you're careful with what you're doing and you're sort of observant in the lab, what you realize is that they themselves will dissolve away in water. And so what's shown here are atomic force micrographs, sort of magnified z-axis on these images, showing the gradual dissolution of a nanoscale platelet of monocrystalline device grade silicon when immersed in a phosphate buffered saline solution at physiological pH and temperature. And what you find is through reactions that involve surface erosion, the silicon will just gradually dissolve over the time scale of a couple of weeks. Very slow chemistry here, a couple of nanometers per day in terms of dissolution rate, but definitely very important chemistry in the context of thinking about a building block material, a semiconductor material for these envisioned water-soluble electronic systems. And so the bottom right shows sort of the time dependence of the height or the thicknesses of these nanoscale platelets of silicon, as a function of time in days. And so in about 3 weeks, you lose about 100 nanometers, something like that. And seems like it's slow, but these are timescales that very well align to all sorts of medical applications for temporary implants. And the chemistry is shown here. It turns out to be pretty simple chemistry, very similar to that associated with bulk micromachining of silicon that's been going on in the MEMS community over the years, but typically done at very basic conditions. And here we are at a near neutral pH. It's still a chemical reaction that's at play. It just involves rate constants very, very low. And so it's silicon just reacting with water to form silicic acid and hydrogen. Silicic acid is naturally occurring in groundwater and biofluids, so it's biocompatible. And the amount of silicon that you're talking about for circuits made with these nanostructured elements of silicon is very, very low. So the dosing level of silicon is low, and silicic acid is naturally occurring in the body anyway. So that's sort of a biocompatible semiconductor as well, undergoing a reaction that involves this kind of surface reactivity and erosion. And so we spent some time studying the basic material science associated with that. And this is MD simulations that were done by a collaborator of ours back at University of Illinois. And it shows the dissolution of silicon, that tagged larger silicon atom that is on the right side of this view graph is dissolving into silicic acid, which is water soluble. And so you can imagine you continue this simulation out for a long enough time period, that nanocrystal of silicon will be completely consumed by that kind of hydrolysis reaction. So that turned out to be pretty cool, and we got pretty excited. We just stumbled across it, and so begin to think about, well, what can we pair with silicon as a semiconductor, or what other kinds of water-soluble semiconductors could you think about, and how could you combine them with different kinds of water-soluble dielectrics and metals for interconnects and substrates to begin to put together a full portfolio of electronic materials that are water-soluble. And I won't go through the details here, but you can actually do that, and these are high-quality not only semiconductors, but dielectrics and metals and substrates and so on. And you can pattern them, and you can build devices and begin to build full integrated systems that have levels of functionality that address real practical application requirements. And here's an example of that. So we've taken silicon as a semiconductor, combined it with silicon oxide, silicon dioxide as a gate insulator, magnesium as a conductor, magnesium oxide as an interlayer dielectric, and then we're using purified silk fiber and cast into thin film form as a substrate and an encapsulation layer. And put it all together, patterned form, we can create RF ring oscillators, in this case, a Cole-Pitts oscillator that combines a lot of the building blocks that you might think about for more sophisticated integrated circuits: an RF diode, silicon MOSFET, resistor, inductor, capacitor, and interconnects, and so on. And the key defining feature here is that all of the constituent materials dissolve completely in an aqueous environment. So this is something we did for DARPA in the very early days, and just showing how these circuits can kind of melt away with kinetics that are really defined in this case by the crystallinity of the silk fibrin that we're using for the substrate. So it dissolves very quickly, and then the individual components of the different devices dissolve over slightly longer timescales. Anyway, you can do that. The amount of electronic materials in any kind of system of this type is very small because these are very thin films or nanostructured elements, sort of microgram quantities. Silicon, magnesium found in multivitamin tablets. And so there's good reason to believe that these materials are biocompatible and environmentally friendly. And they turn out to be in fact, and we've done many animal model studies of toxicity, cell-based studies as well. So I won't go into the details, just begin to talk about applications then. Those are the materials foundations, and you can pair those materials with various fabrication approaches and begin to build prototype systems that address real needs in biomedical technology and also environmental monitoring. So let me start. I'll just give you one example of what we're doing in active projects in temporary implants. Just focus on pacemakers. And so I didn't really realize this, but in most cases, if you have a cardiac operation, an invasive one like an open heart surgery, what the surgeons will do at the very tail end of that surgery is they will place a pacemaker, a temporary pacemaker, that they can use during that critical risk period following the surgery, as the patient is recovering from the surgery, to pace the heart as necessary to maintain proper health status of the patient. And those temporary pacemakers are typically just wired leads that interface with the outer surface of the heart and then come percutaneously to connect to an external power source to generate the pulses to do the pacing. And so interventional cardiologists approach us and ask whether we could develop a transient or a bioresorbable wireless equivalent to that kind of wired-based pacemaker that could be used in place of that conventional technology to eliminate some of the risk associated with temporary pacemakers in patient care. So the idea was to place the bioresorbable pacemaker at the tail end of the surgery, allow it to be wirelessly powered and controlled during that recovery period, but design the pacemaker to sort of dissolve and disappear after it's no longer needed, maybe 2-3 weeks after the surgery. And that seemed like a good challenge, and we decided to collaborate with those clinical surgeons to put something together to address those requirements and just sort of highlight the risk associated with the conventional temporary pacemaker, and that is that the leads become encapsulated in fibrotic tissue over the period of their use. And so when it comes time to remove them, they're just pulled out of the body. And when they're pulled out, the tearing of that fibrotic tissue can lead to damage of the healthy heart tissue. And in some cases, that can lead to internal bleeding that can cause patient death. And in fact, just as an anecdote, that's the way Neil Armstrong passed away, is due to complications associated with the removal of his temporary pacemaker. He developed a serious internal bleed that they couldn't stop, and he bled out and passed away in that fashion. And so the idea is a temporary bioresorbable pacemaker would eliminate that risk factor because it doesn't need to be surgically extracted. It just dissolves away on its own. And so this is an example of the device we put together using the same constituent materials, nanomaterial approaches, and the silicon level to address those requirements. And so it's a pair of pacing leads that interface with the myocardium. It's magnetically inductively coupled to an external powered RF antenna. There's a silicon nanomembrane diode that does rectification of the AC power that's harvested in that way. And then that power is routed to the surface of the heart to do pacing. And so that works. That's what it looks like. And this is the results of animal model trials, just demonstrating the capabilities on a small animal, rat model in this particular case. But we've done mice, rats, rabbits, canine models, porcine models, and also human hearts from organ donors, just to demonstrate you can capture heart rhythm at the human scale with these devices. And so we have some advances in this space. We'll be reporting them soon, but this is an area of application that I think is well addressed by this concept of bioresorbable water-soluble electronics. And of course, we studied the mechanisms associated with bioresorption over time, and I won't get into the details here, but typically a couple of months and the devices will dissolve away pretty much completely. So the other area of application I mentioned at the beginning was to think about how we can take these components and these materials and not only apply them to human health, but also environmental health, and disperse them out at scale, and maybe develop radio capabilities or other wireless methods for reading out sensing of key parameters associated with the environment. So heavy metal contamination, for example, pH of the soil, temperature, humidity readings, that sort of thing. And so the challenge there is, how do you disperse tiny devices, over very large areas effectively? And we were thinking about, different ways to do that. And maybe you create, a micro flyer that could zip around like a gnat or something like that, or like an insect, and that might be pretty cool. Seems pretty hard, but there may be other kind of bio inspired concepts that you could think about that rely more on passive mechanisms for flight. And we got inspired by the plant world, where the name of the game there is to design seeds that can interact with ambient patterns of airflow to maximally distribute genetic material in the form of a seed. And there are all kinds of different strategies that have developed through evolutionary processes in the plant world to sort of affect that kind of dispersion. And then we thought about whether we could create winged sort of transient microchips that could be dispersed using similar mechanisms. And we thought about parachutes, like dandelions. We thought about gliders. There are other types of seeds that adopt that kind of design, but we're mostly intrigued by these helicopter type flight dynamics that you see in maple seeds and tristillaceous seeds and so on. And they're really sort of ingenious, aerodynamic structures. And this rotational behavior really reduces the terminal velocity to extend the time with which these seeds can interact with ambient patterns of airflow as they fall from a tree, for example, to the ground under the action of gravity. And so the question is, could we add that kind of winged flight to transient microchips with digital sensor capabilities? And so the question then is, how do you do 3D? How do you put three-dimensional helicopter wings onto chips, microchips? And we've been working on different kinds of approaches to affect a 2D to 3D transformation process, and originally sort of planar device structures. And we were able to put together some strategies that rely on mechanical buckling. And this is a finite element modeling rendering of that kind of 2D to 3D transformation process. And it really starts with a biaxially strained elastomer substrate with planar precursors bonded at specific locations to that elastomer, such that when the pre-strain is relaxed, it applies compressive forces to those structures, and thereby inducing kind of a buckling process that geometrically transforms those 2D structures into well-engineered 3D systems, in this case, microchips on the planar surface of that elastomer with wings that move up out of the plane to create this kind of helicopter-like flight dynamics in free fall. So you're able to do that, and it's an approach that applies to large collections of structures. So you can almost, in a combinatorial sense, begin to explore different types of wing geometries, numbers of wings, tack angles, porosity, all sorts of weight distribution and that kind of thing, degree of three-dimensionality, and turned out to be a really interesting set of projects and opportunities in understanding the patterns of airflow that develop across these unusual 3D structures, all fully compatible with planar device technology is a key feature of the way that we're creating these structures, and scalable to very tiny sizes. So if you think about distributing large numbers of digital sensors into the environment, you'd like to keep the cost of any individual sensor to as low a value as possible. And in most electronic systems, you pay per unit area. So the idea of very tiny microscale passive flyers is one that's very important in this potential area of applications, to make things that are much, much smaller than seeds that you would see in the natural world, but still adopting this kind of helicopter-like flight dynamics. And so I don't think I have time to go through all of the details. We've done lots of wind tunnel studies and modeling of how this flight develops, how it depends on the size of these flyers, the geometries of the wings and the weight distributions and so on. But you can do that. And because it's all starting from a planar precursor, it's fully compatible with any kind of planar processing, including that associated with forming antennas and collections of microchips and interconnects and so on, all built out of bioresorbable materials. And so here's that 2D to 3D geometry transformation process modeled in the context of a fully integrated electronic system, adding wings and winged flight to that kind of platform. So this is a first example. This is a wireless UV dosimeter. It's light dosimeter, actually multi-channel. And so it's collecting light exposure information during free fall. And that turns out to be a pretty good surrogate for particulate air pollution. And so you can sort of do measurements in that way during flight. Or even in a more simple strategy, if you don't want to do electronics, you can include colorimetric chemical reagents and then use high resolution video and digital image capture to do the readout. And so that turns out to be a little bit simpler and more scalable, more cost effective. And so this is an example of a colorimetric pH sensor in the form of one of those helicopter type structures built out of completely bioresorbable materials. And so this is an example of one of those colorimetric flyers, again in this sort of simulated rainfall, to show how it will dissolve away over time into environmentally compatible end products, thereby eliminating the need for collection of these devices after they've been distributed. So you can kind of scale those ideas. So each individual flyer could have multiple colorimetric assays for different environmental parameters of interest, in this case, UV exposure, heavy metal contamination, pH on each individual flyer, again, selected with colorimetric chemistries that are themselves environmentally compatible and resorbable. So this is a really simple demonstration of those concepts, but sort of trivial, but kind of fun field trial. And we use the football field at Northwestern. We have a terrible football team, but we were able to use the football field to good purpose, at least for these experiments. And so we have a drone for dropping these flyers out over a large area, and it has a high resolution digital camera. So we can move back over the area where the drones have been dropped out and take high resolution color pictures of the drones. And then we do color extraction to determine these various environmental parameters as a function of position across an area and as a function of time by repeatedly scanning the space with the drone. So that's kind of what we're doing from an academic exploratory standpoint. We'd like to think about designs that go beyond those that are found in the natural world. So you don't have to just do parachutes or gliders or helicopters, but you can kind of combine these different features. You can have, helicopters that also have parachute type structures built into them. And, the versatility of these 2D to 3D geometry transformation techniques allow access to a tremendous variety of different flying structures in terms of geometry and size. And so there's a lot of work that we're doing now around the aerodynamics of these things, specifically measuring the coefficient of drag as a function of Reynolds number and different geometries for different flyer sizes that represents an area of continued work. But I think I'm out of time. I'm about 28 minutes, and so maybe a question or two, but I just want to summarize what we've been doing in this area of environmentally and biologically resorbable electronic technologies, both in sort of the realm of biomedical engineering and human healthcare, but also in environmental monitoring and tracking of parameters related to environmental contamination using these passive flyer structures. So with that, I'll just conclude by acknowledging senior collaborators, in these areas, engineering, science, clinical medicine as well, and acknowledging the group and all the talented students who actually do the work. So thanks again, Gary, for inviting me, and happy to answer questions if there are any.
Thank you, John. That was fantastic. You forever changed how I'll look at a Northwestern football game. Yeah. So do we have time for one or two questions for John? Is there there was a question in the chat. What does it say here? It's from Jose Asulin. Why would it be important to have a dissolvable pacemaker?
Yeah, I tried to sort of outline the motivation there. The idea is that current standard of care for a cardiac patient who's undergone a cardiac surgery is to place what they refer to as a temporary pacemaker. Because in many cases during the recovery period, the heart rate can drop to dangerously low values. And if that happens with a patient, you need to be able to pace the heart up to a higher heart rate in a more normal range. But you really only need to do that kind of pacing on an emergency basis during the recovery period. Once the patient's recovered, in most cases, they don't need the pacemaker anymore. And so it's typically removed, surgically removed. They just pull it out of the patient's body. And that removal process can sometimes lead to damage to healthy cardiac tissue and internal bleeding and all sorts of risks. So the idea is if you could build a pacemaker that offers that kind of functionality over a relevant time scale aligned with that recovery period, then you wouldn't need to remove it. You could just leave it in the body, it would dissolve away. So that was the use case, and it was brought to us. I mean, we didn't make it up. So it was brought to us by cardiac surgeons, and they said, here's a need that you could address with your technology. And so we ended up collaborating with them, still working with them.
Awesome. Okay, we have one more question maybe from Irma, raised her hand.
Hi, so I have a question. So this is excellent, of course, that is all true, that of course retractable things are dissolvable. How about the opposite? Something that cardiac surgeons, when they operate on young patients, sometimes they want to do implants that stay as long as they can, right? So have you investigated silicon type devices, or what would be the threshold thickness after which it becomes stable, doesn't dissolve, doesn't degrade?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, it's a good question. So silicon, when it's exposed to biofluids, will dissolve, but if it's packaged such that biofluids never interact directly with the silicon, of course it'll last forever. And so it's really a question of what do you package the silicon with? So for the transient devices, we use water-soluble materials, and we choose those materials to have rates of dissolution that align with the operational lifetime of the application we're thinking about. And once the encapsulating materials have been compromised and the silicon is now exposed to biofluids, we assume the device is no longer working, and we don't attempt to allow it to work as the silicon is dissolving, because too many different features of performance will drift in ways that are impossible to predict. And so for a chronic implant, what you want then is an encapsulating material that does not dissolve and that serves as a perfect barrier to biofluids, so that there's never any opportunity for hydrolysis to begin to dissolve the silicon. And so for long-term implant, that in itself turns out to be a big challenge. If you want a flexible device, your encapsulating layers have to be pretty thin. What are you going to use to keep out warm saline solution? Essentially, this is biofluids for what could be, I think, as you're suggesting, timescales equal to the life of the patient. So it could be 50 years. And maybe you want to over-engineer your system. So now you're talking about a device that would last 100 years in warm salt water.
20 years or 25.
Yeah, whatever it is, it's hard. That's what I'm saying. And there's no polymer material that I'm aware of that will do the trick. No polymers provide hermetic, boundary for humidity or biofluids. And so we looked at very dense, inorganic thin films. Thermally grown silicon dioxide, for example, dissolves very, very slowly, almost a perfect barrier. But even then, if the intrinsic properties are good in terms of water permeability, you also have to worry about extrinsic effects, pinhole defects and cracks and things like that. It turns out to be really tough. We spent a lot of time on it, and it's a great question. I would say like a partly solved solution, in the sense that there are strategies that can be used to build devices that have very long lifetimes, but tricky in the sense they're fragile, they're not easy to build. I think there's room for improvement there.
Thank you. That's
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think in the interest of time, we do need to move on, but John, thank you again for a great talk. And
great. Thanks, Gary. Yeah.
Okay, so the next speaker is Elena Rushkova from right here in the Center for Nanoscale Materials, and she has a very successful research program in artificial photosynthesis and biomimetic energy conversion. And so welcome, Elena.
Thank you, Gary, for nice introduction. I am grateful to the organizers. Thank you, Reno and Gary. And I am very grateful to all previous speakers, and especially last speaker, Professor Rogers. Thank you for your really inspiring talk. And so let me start sharing my screen. So, and I will start. Okay. 1 second. So, since I'm working at my main interest in nanotechnology is biologically inspired and
I
biologically.
might interrupt. Can you, we don't see your,
You
we don't
don't?
see it in screen in the sharing mode. It looks like it's in the, can you, maybe there's a button somewhere that reverses the screen, or we see your slides on the, all your
Okay.
slides on the left, and
Okay, stop sharing, then let's do it again.
I don't think where that might be. Maybe someone online knows where to find it in Zoom. I don't see it right now. Sometimes there's a switch displays, or
How about now? Can you see it now?
yeah, it's still the same. It should be
It's
okay.
in not presentation mode though.
Yeah, it's not in presentation mode, but we could still work with it.
It was just like a regular PowerPoint.
I actually started. Okay, share screen again. So it should be like this one. So can you see it now?
It's still the same. We can live with it. Oh, there we go. Now you got it. Perfect.
Good. So means I need a quickly pointer. Okay, I am a staff scientist at the Center for Nanoscale Materials, and actually this is our event, users meeting. And my key interests are biologically inspired, biologically enabled, or enhanced nanobiomaterials. And actually, it's a very quick slide. Whatever I'm going to present today was done using CNM tools and argon tools. And we start normally from, as I said, from biological phenomena inspiration, since many biological processes, if not all processes, include energy conversion. So such as sunlight absorption, charge separation, charge transfer. We utilize all suite of bottom-up and top-down techniques to produce both inorganic materials, to synthesize them, or to isolate biological entities from biological sources. So together we combine them, we co-assemble them, and toward directed property evolution. And very often, even if we start from biological materials and biological inspiration, we come to a new function which is not probably even observed in biology, to solve for solving emerging global challenges in energy, environment, and health. So just a cartoon summarizing like soft biological materials and inorganic nanostructures for a variety of applications. And today I'm going to focus on solar energy conversion. So in biology, as it's known, solar energy is utilized by green plants and algae through a complex process known as photosynthesis. So it includes two steps: light reaction, which is water splitting, and second dark reaction is carbon fixation that results in conversion of carbon dioxide to sugars, to energy of organic molecules. This is a complex multi-electron step reactions, mechanisms based on chlorophyll. But I would like to tell upfront, we are not using this. We are using this just like as an inspiration. And at the right side, there is another biological process of utilizing solar energy. It's based on chlorophyll independent pathway and only one protein known as proton pump, such as proton pump of bacteria rhodopsin. This is evolutionary distinct mechanism utilized by archaeas. So we were inspired with minimalistic approach by nature that we use proton pumps in pretty much many of our energy conversion architectures. So just let me quickly explain. So this is only one protein is involved, no cofactors. It's 26 kilodaltons, little bit more than 220 amino acids pore. And in the middle of pore is retinol cofactor. And whole mechanism is pretty much based on photoisomerization of retinol, then mechanochemical process of proton transfer across the membrane is initiated, and this transmembrane electrochemical potential then is utilized by another like nano scale proton machinery of ATP synthase. Even more, surface of archaea is oversaturated with proton pump, and surface is a combination of lipids and proton pump. It looks like a biologically occurring example of 2D crystal lattice. Spectral optimum for this protein is 560 nanometers, and it's really neatly neat architect, thickness of 5 nanometers, and actually it's stable at multiple photocycles in presence of oxygen. It tolerates sunlight, and it's important, tolerates pHs from 0 to 12 and high temperatures. So as a film is over 140 degrees C, and in a solution it may be over 80 degrees C. So also it's important, the protein, the microbe is extremophilic, and it exists in it's salt-loving halobacterium, and then it allows for easy isolation of purple membranes from cultures. Then microorganisms can be just collected, water added, and then they burst, and the last step of isolation is ultracentrifugation. So now I would like to remind like brand name artificial photosynthesis, which was pioneered by Japanese scientists Fujishima and Honda, who actually looked at this reaction, that water splitting, which is uphill reaction, and to move this reaction toward oxygen and protons and electrons, excess of external energy is needed. And they propose that sunlight can be source of this energy. So they utilized photoelectrochemical cell for that. They constructed using titanium dioxide working electrode and platinum counter electrode. And they demonstrated that upon UV light excitation, they could split water. So now, if we imagine with two electrodes, we can move very close to each other and scale down to nanoscale. So we can come to like photocatalysis, or like hybrid photocatalytic nanoparticle which is actually photocatalysis is a key focus of our research. So we are trying to do to find photocatalytic systems which can work wireless. However, we also use electrochemical cells to study mechanisms of how this work, how our architectures, how our catalysis works. So in here also, broadly speaking, photocatalysis includes main steps. It's light absorption, then separation of excited charges, then migration or transfer of photoexcited electrons and holes on the surface of the catalyst, and then utilization of these photoexcited charges, if they long enough living to drive variety of catalytic reactions. So also it's very interesting, one of quite recent years trend is utilizing biological non-photosynthetic structures like bacteria or like enzymes, combine them with nanoparticles to provide photo-induced electrons instead of biologically expensive cofactors to drive natural reactions. So basically, this is another example. So what we are doing is a little bit different from all previously mentioned. So, and the key majority of our architectures are based on this simple energy diagram. So if we mix our proton pump with semiconductors like titanium dioxide, upon light illumination, photo-induced electrons are transferred from HOMO to LUMO and then injected to conduction band of the semiconductor due to energetically higher state, excited state of in the proton pump. So we started our works from photo-induced hydrogen generation, and we actually published a few papers about that with key ideas. So if we mix titanium dioxide like P25 co-assembled with purple membrane, upon white light illumination, we observe hydrogen production. So, and we using a variety of techniques, including photochemistry and transit absorption techniques and EPR, we demonstrated that in this system, biological material serves for two functions. It's dye-synthesizing titanium dioxide to visible light, and also it enhances water splitting reaction via proton pumping. So it's very important to mention that system works at ambient conditions in water at room temperature and neutral pHs, and utilize also sacrificial electron donors. So after we completed like a series of these works, then we varied different components. We included some carbon materials. We studied electron transfer. We decided to try something more than just hydrogen production. And then in this case, we needed to switch from just a co-assembly of titanium dioxide clusters to more sophisticated systems with controllable structures. So one work I would like to mention, we completed work on photosynthesis of fine organic molecules like ATP, using plasmon enhanced solar energy conversion with plasmon nanoparticles. But today, I am more interested to show another work. It's work on CO2 reduction to value added chemicals using pretty much very similar components. So this work is published. Here's my collaborators and co-authors. So it's known that it's much easier to complete water splitting than reactions of CO2 reduction to different variety of products. So they are all uphill reactions. However, CO2 reduction is quite difficult to be catalyzed. So as you can see from this table, direct one electron reduction to CO2 anion radical is the most difficult part. However, it was proposed by other scientists that this kind of this reaction can go much easier if via proton coupled electron transfer. So, but in case of proton coupled electron transfer, we are coming with need of protons and electrons, much more protons and much more electrons than just one electron transfer. So just to show a couple examples relevant to our results, carbon monoxide requires reduction to carbon monoxide requires 2 protons and 2 electrons, while if we need to we wanted to come to methane, we need already 8 protons and 8 electrons. So inspired by proton light driven proton pumping activity of our purple membranes, we came to this scheme. So we isolated membranes from halobacteria, reconstituted them to lipid vesicles, and also in this case we did not work with just P25 titanium dioxide, but we came to need of a hollow mesoporous structure, and instead of platinum co-catalyst we utilize palladium since it's more favorable, more selective for CO2 reduction rather than hydrogen generation. And last step is fusion of both soft and hard material to biohybrid. So everything started from synthesis. So we start from synthesis of mesoporous hollow titanium dioxide cages through first synthesis of silicon nanoparticles and then reduction of titanium dioxide on surface of nanoparticles. Then we removed, actually I do not see my presentation now, my screen is getting dark for some reasons, but yeah, then we actually also deposited on the surface of these cages palladium dots, and we also modify surface with through aminosilane chemistry to have positive charges.
Elena, when you switched there, you went back to your first slide from our view.
Yes. Oh, okay. But it's interesting. I see myself. I see correct slide. Okay.
Okay.
Now better.
Yes.
Yeah. So based on this TM and EDS data, we can see all mentioned elements present, and shell thickness is around 25 nanometers, while inner cavity is 270 nanometers, and size of palladium co-catalyst dots around 2 and 2.5 nanometers. Okay. So do I move? Or I don't,
Yes, you're moving.
because I see something totally different. Okay, so next step is biohybrid assembly. So it was important to just we could not assemble directly because of we wanted to a certain direction of protons. So while in natural systems protons are transferred outside of host cell, we wanted to direct protons inside of hollow particles. And for these reasons, we mastered vesicles formation, and also actually upon fusion of these vesicles, here's just it's a vesicles, and here's like a biohybrid. So it was tremendously important to actually direct protons, photo-induced protons and electrons inside of the hollow particles. So here then we needed to show that proton pumping activities are still there and biological function is preserved. And here you can see this is a difference in pHs. It's a increase of pH of in outer side of in a bulk solvent outside of nanoparticles. So upon light illumination, you can see pH is going up, and then light is off. It's due to backward reaction, backward transfer is going off. It's important to show here that we utilized multiple, like there is no reaction in dark. There is no reaction if you do not have proton pumps, but just inorganic particles. And there is no reaction if we use organic inhibitor of proton transfer, CCCP. And also, it's known from literature that gadolinium salts, gadolinium complexes can actually block proton pumping only from carboxylic side, from negatively charged side of membrane. So it allowed us to, using this gadolinium blocker, to calculate overall preference of proton transfer, and we discovered is over 90% of purple membranes oriented the way that protons can go inside of the hollow nanoparticles. So then we switched to study of charge transfer between biotic and abiotic parts of our architectures. First, it was femtosecond TA. So we demonstrated that comparing purple membranes assembled in vesicles and nanobiohybrid, we demonstrated efficient charge transfer of over 74%. And then we moved also to characterization using EPR. It was done by Oleg Polek, if I'm saying up front, because of its it's a sophisticated technique. It was demonstrated that upon light illumination, formation of radical, organic radical, typical for radical near proximity of excited titanium dioxide. And also it's important at low temperatures, upon then light was off at 10 kelvins, that charge separation state was preserved. And even more interesting, Oleg tried to different lasers wavelengths, to see efficiency, what kind of wavelengths were more efficient to produce this charge separation state. And it was observed the most efficient charge separation was at 440 nanometers and 500 nanometers wavelengths of light. And it's interesting if I show you photocycle of proton pump. At this wavelengths, around 400 and 500 nanometers, it's exactly the step then proton is released and transferred across membrane. So it's kind of together with our data on inhibitors of proton transfer, together we can conclude we indeed observe proton coupled electron transfer in our system. And then we come to the final part of this work, CO2 reduction to value-added chemicals. It's very interesting what we observed. So within first 2 hours, only CO2 formation was observed. And then it came to plateau. However, after 2 hours, the key product of this was methane. And again, there is no reaction in dark. There is no reaction in atmosphere of nitrogen. And also, it's very interesting, if we started from CO, not CO2, we also did not observe any methane formation. So there is also we try to with catalytic reactions in presence of inhibitors like decoupler of proton transfer or at very low pHs. And we again demonstrate that if we can, if both events like photoinduced electrons and photoinduced protons were in the game, we observed with photocatalytic activities. So, and it's important that this photocatalyst is stable for like up to 10 hours, at least what we measured, and also can be recycled. So we can conclude here that, as I mentioned at the beginning, to complete CH4 methane photocatalysis, we need a lot of protons and electrons. So that's why probably we can propose that dynamics of products formation like that. So first, then we had less electrons and protons. We observed CO formation, while after a certain time, we switched to, then we had enough protons and electrons inside of hollow structure in water, with water inside. We observed mostly methane formation. So let me quickly conclude. Very often we getting inspired by biological processes, and very often if we look at biological function, like as a useful function we can utilize in our engineered structures, we can come to variety of properties to apply to in catalysis. And it's very important that with all catalytic reactions I mentioned today, they do not require harsh conditions, and they can run at biological conditions. It's very important also this flexible approach allows us to actually vary reactions from hydrogen production to CO2 reduction. And very important also, if we compare with, for example, with systems like photosystem isolated and combined with inorganic, like with platinum particles. These are just beautiful works in this area. However, isolated photosystem requires multiple cofactors, and actually it's more expensive system than our minimalistic approach. And I'm very grateful to everyone who works with me, and to my former postdocs, especially to Zhao Wei Chen, who contributed to this CO2 reduction work like mostly. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Elena. Very, very nice work. Let's see, maybe we have time for one question. How robust are these structures under both either the optical illumination in the lab as well as, out in the real world? How would they last a while? Or?
Yes, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is very robust system. It's like membranes of extremophilic microorganism, and they are super stable at a variety of pH from 0 to 12 to multiple photocycles to oxygen. And if I did not mention it, but it's even due to they have actually very specific lipids in this structure. They are even stable toward microorganisms, so bacteria does not want to eat them. So basically, these are very, very biological but very stable structures.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I think in the interest of time, we will have to move on, but thank you again, Elena. Okay, it's time for our third and final session, titled Sustainable Manufacturing with Nanomaterials. We have 4 great speakers lined up. And the first speaker is Ani Sumant, who is the group leader of our nanofabrication and devices group here in the Center for Nanoscale Materials. He has a very interesting research program in lubricants that are green in nature. With that, Ani, welcome to your talk.
Thank you, Gary. Can you see my slide in the presentation mode?
Yes, looks good.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'd like to thank Gary and the other organizers for inviting me for this wonderful seminar. Actually, I've been listening, since morning, and there have been very interesting talks, since morning, and particularly this afternoon session. So I'm going to switch the gear a little bit, and as Gary mentioned, we'll be talking about some of the lubricant, work that we have been doing from the last few years. Most of the work that I'm going to show is done by my 2 postdocs, Aditya and Kalyan. And then I just wanted to get on to the topic right away. So you probably know about the decarbonization goal. I think US has already mentioned by 2050 net zero carbon emission. So in each and every industry, there's a lot of talk going on and work going on regarding how to reduce the carbon emission. So in 2017, there was very interesting report which was published by ARPA-E, and it was related to the tribology. And if you look at the energy dissipation in the friction, about 1/3 of the energy that we produce actually is we lose in the friction related losses. And the scenario that they presented there, if we conservatively, if we think about just saving 1.3%, of that for reduced friction and wear and tear parts, excuse me, then that will translate into the saving of about 173 million barrels of oil. And if you convert that into dollar, actually now in today's currency, I think it will be much more than this, but it's about $12 billion. So just 1.3% saving, in the friction and wear losses can save this much in the the oil that we are producing. And I think I'm saying in terms of oil because oil is one of the major lubricant is used as a in the industry. And then you can not only think about the oil saved, but that lubricant oil that could be also spent after the lubrication is done. That's an environmental problem. So there is a lot of interest in developing sort of environmental friendly lubricants or going away from the oil-based lubricants to the solid lubricant. So that comes down to the solid lubrication story, and then you probably know that graphite is from century is known as one of the lubricant, and then graphite you find it in your pencil, and then if you zoom in onto the whatever you draw with the pencil and you put it under the electron microscope, you will see these millions of layers, which is apart by just 0.34 nanometers, and you probably know in 2010, the two scientists from University of Manchester were able to separate one atom thin layer of this graphite. It's called graphene. And then graphene has been known, for a lot of interesting electronic properties, but we are mostly interested, its mechanical properties as well. And then, from 2011, we started working on this material. There was very interesting quest that first we wanted to check out is how graphene is different than the graphite. Since the graphite is well known as a lubricant, it's been used in the industry, as I said, from centuries. So if you just do the simple pin on disk test, and I'll explain as we go, in my presentation what is pin on disk or tribology test we do, but this is just sliding two surfaces against each other. If we do it in dry nitrogen, then the graphite has very high friction because of the dangling bonds there. But if you do it in humid air, since this graphite has a weakly van der Waals forces between the layers, the moisture that seeps into these layers acts as a kind of lubricant. And that's why you see a low friction in humid air. So this is one of the characteristic feature of the graphite. But when we start using graphene, on my right side of this graph, in this case, we actually change the conditions from humid air to dry nitrogen, and then we see a little difference, in the friction coefficient. So that was the first wow moment for us. And this was a paper that we published some time back, which has been cited many times, where we show that the graphene is, work very differently than the graphite, which is the bulk, behavior of the same material, graphene. And then, we show that the graphene works equally good in dry and humid environment. So that was the real interesting part of our investigations. And then we started, knowing more about how the graphene works as a lubricant. So, if you see the just the graphene here sprinkled on the stainless steel surface, it's very discontinuous in layer. And as you can see in the SEM image, and then the way we actually test it, you sprinkled it on the surface, then there is a pin, which is a steel ball, and then steel plate, and then you apply some pressure, and then the steel plate is revolving in one direction, and then the tangential force on that pin basically gives you the friction coefficient by using the Hamilton's law, using a multi-asperity contact where friction force is directly proportional to load with a constant mu, which is a friction coefficient. So one can imagine that you can just disperse these graphene platelets through some solvent solution, maybe alcohol, ethanol, onto the stainless steel surface, and then there are this uneven distribution of this graphite or graphene platelets. Once you start rubbing the surface each other, then there is a self-assembly of this graphene takes place onto the surface, because of very, very low shearing, that happens between these two graphene layers. And then within the wear track, it actually provides a kind of nice layer of a graphene, and that reduces the friction and wear. So it's worked very differently than the traditional thin film solid lubricant coating, because they are stationary, whereas these flakes are mobile and then kind of acts as a crystalline oil, as you can think of, and then provides better lubrication, and it changes as your surface changes. So that's a dynamics part of this graphene as a lubricant. So as compared to the steel against steel, what we see a dramatic reduction in the friction and the wear, as you can see in the humid air, in the dry nitrogen 5 times, then the steel and the wear is reduced by 10,000 times. So this was definitely, and just few, atom thin layers of this graphene can do this wonder. So it was very interesting, to see that, and there are no environmental hazards available. Basically, when this, graphene is wear down, is basically a, is a oxidized, graphene oxide on your surface, just like on your barbecue, when you scrape it, what you have left. So this is, easily degradable in the environments, but it's, gives 5 times low friction and 10,000 times reduction on the wear. So that was very impressive to see. So with these there is a lot of interest in the lubrication industry in various areas, in ball bearings, wind turbines, stamping, and you name, everything. So I'm going to talk about some of the application here, like stamping and then oil and gas industry in particular. But let me explain a little bit about the super lubricity. So we talked about the lower friction and wear, but even going down when there is a vanishing friction and wear is called super lubricity. It's not like a superconductivity where the current reduces to zero, because in the mechanical vibrations, there is always going to be the atoms that vibrate. So there is finite amount of energy dissipation that always remains. So the super lubricity term was coined, by Japanese scientist Hirano in 90s. And then first experimental evidence, after that, the convincing evidence, I think by German scientist Martin Weibel, where he first showed the graphite sliding against graphite. This is the AFM-like apparatus. And then they were, basically changing the angle of the graphite. And what they found is that at certain angle, or the magic angle, the friction reduces, to very, very low value. And what they called is as the structural lubricity. And you can imagine this as a kind of egg cart, where you're sliding the egg cart, at certain angle, it's gonna slide it, but at certain angle, I think it won't slide because it's interlocking mechanism there. So let me get my pointer here, if I could. Yeah. Okay, so in this way, they have shown, from nanoscale to the micro scale. This is from the Tsinghua University, where they actually, displace this graphite flake. And then even without applying force, it returns to the normal position in insert. Other cases, people have shown with a double wall carbon nanotube, if, different chirality, if you attach the AFM probe, to the inner tube, and then you pull it in one direction, basically they see negligible force, and they basically call it as a macro scale super lubricity, because it's on centimeter or millimeter scale, and they have shown. So going from nanoscale to the larger length scale, people have shown the super lubricity. But most of these examples which are not suitable for the practical applications. So in 2015, we came up with this idea of incorporating graphene and nanodiamond together, and then sliding it against amorphous carbon, which provides an infinite incommensurate surface. And then what we have seen is very interesting, is that when we have this graphene and nanodiamond together, that's where we saw the super lubricity when the friction coefficient goes down to below 0.01. That's what called super lubricity. And then even just with nanodiamond, we couldn't get it. So it's only when, when we have this combined together. And this is because of very interesting, structural reorganization that happens at nanoscale, that we have this nanodiamond, and this nanodiamond always have complex, surface chemistry, and the edges of the graphene are very reactive. So they lock onto this surface chemistry, and this form this nice, scroll, which is shown here. And if I can show here in the simulation, I think, let me see if I can. Okay, maybe I think it's don't want to do it. Let's skip that. But in this simulation, what we have shown is that this graphene nicely attaches to the edges of this nanodiamond and form this scroll. So it was very interesting, experimental as well as with the theory, that we have shown that once you form this scroll, it forms this nanoscale ball bearing, and then it reduces the contact area, and then that's how you get super lubricity. So yeah, here it is now. So that's where I think we show very interestingly that this form this ball bearing, and the nanodiamond is free to move inside, and then it acts as a kind of nanoscale ball bearing. So going forward, then we talk about this in different system, including the molybdenum disulfide and nanodiamond. And then we have now the superlubricity lab here at CNM that can study the wear friction at macro scale as well as at nanoscale by using this pico indenter, that we can see in situ in the TEM while we are sliding against each other, different tips of different material. So over the years, we developed different kinds of lubricants. As I said, this is where this is a, we see a very interesting behavior on the run-in. So this time to reach the super lubricity, where it is about thousands of cycles. But when we switch to MOS2 and nanodiamond, then we see that it switched basically to few hundred cycles. But when we switch to graphene to ion nanoparticles, it is actually the run-in period goes to a few tens of a cycle. So the time to get the super lubricity is reduced substantially, and there is very interesting mechanism at play that we see at this nanoscale contacts. In case of a graphene nanodiamond, we have the structural reorganization, but in case of a MOS2 and nanodiamond, there is a very interesting trabochemistry at play. What happens is at high contact pressure, there is a disintegration of MOS2, and the sulfur actually diffuses into the nanodiamond, produces a lot of strain, and then it destroys the nanodiamond completely, and then it forms this beautiful onion-like carbon structure that again acts as a nanodiamond and gives rise to super lubricity. Now, in case of graphene and ion nanoparticle, there is an interaction, there's an exothermic reaction that happens between carbon and graphene, the ion nanoparticle and graphene, and then graphene layer get destroyed, and then again it forms this beautiful onion-like carbon structure, and then which gives finally the super lubricity. So in all these cases, the end product is very similar formation of this nice, beautiful spherical carbon nanoparticles, and that reduces the contact area and gives rise to the super lubricity. Now, in all these cases, we always used atomically smooth surfaces, low contact pressures, but then, for practical application, we really wanted to see how it works on the rough surfaces at high contact pressure and high sliding velocities and speeds. So in this case, we worked with another solid lubricant, which is a molybdenum disulfide, and then we combined with graphene oxide, and I'll explain, why exactly we do that. So MOS2 tribologically, again, just like graphite, is known from many, many years as a solid lubricant. But since sulfur is one of the problem there, sulfur always interact with atmosphere, grab the oxygen, and then that's how degradation of the MOS2 happens with the formation of moly trioxide. So over the years, people have been combining MOS2 with other material like oxides mostly. And these are all the thin films, these are all the thin films. But in this case, we came up with the basically using the 2D materials, because we don't need to go into the vacuum and then all the CVD or PVD process to produce this kind of coatings. We just produce this 2D material, spray coated, and then it can be done in atmosphere. So that's where I think the first thing to reduce the cost completely, very easy process, and even for the 3-dimensional material. And here, for the first time, we show that the durability is much better than any other thin film coating that have been shown before. So how it works, we take the MOS2 nanopowder, combine with graphene oxide solution, do the sonication, and then just spray coat it onto the substrate surface. So this is how it looks like in the ACM. It's about 2.5 micron thick layer, and this is how the Raman spectra look like with the typical MOS2 signature and the typical graphene oxide signature. And then this substrate is subjected to the tribology test, which is a tribometer here at CNM. And these are the typical test parameters with a stainless steel disc, and then the low is going from 1 to 9 Newton. That translate into the contact pressure, the highest up to 919 megapascal, almost 1 gigapascal, and then with the sliding speed up to 500 millimeter per second. In all the tests that we do, until it fails. So here are some of the examples of the test that we have done. Steel against steel, rough surfaces of the steel, no more silicon coupons, and then we are basically doing in different environmental conditions, ambient air and in dry nitrogen. Here we are varying the load from 1 Newton to 9 Newton. And here we are varying the sliding speed to 0.5 meter per second. And if you see here, you see that as you increase the load and increase the sliding speed, the friction in both cases are dropping. And if you see it here on this graph, you can clearly see that a nice reduction, in the friction coefficient as you increase the sliding speed and also the contact ratio. That's basically counterintuitive in a sense that if you increase the contact pressure or the sliding speed, the friction should increase, but the reverse is happening here. And if you look at the wear on the disc, the red is basically when you actually remove the coating. So we basically don't see any measurable wear even after this test. So this is very interesting that just to couple micron thick, this spray coated surface is basically functioning very, very good, very high contact pressure up to 1 gigapascal. We also did the endurance test in air and in dry nitrogen. So in air, we see that the coating fell about, linear sliding distance about 23 kilometers. That's huge. And then in dry nitrogen, exactly double, which is about, 43 kilometers, and it didn't fail. I think our instrument, was actually booked, so we had to take it out. But this is very impressive. Not a thin film coating, just the spray coating on our rough steel surfaces. And we see, distinctly, excellent behavior, in dry nitrogen air. And I'll explain why in air, it doesn't last that long. And then when we calculate the wear, and this is the benchmark, and then we look at the reduction in the wear, in the ambient and also in dry nitrogen, about 2 to 4 orders of magnitude lower than the baseline, so which is excellent. Now, we did the characterization of the wear track in the dry nitrogen and in the ambient air. And then, if you look at carefully, you will see that these are the peaks corresponding to the MOS2, and then the blue line that is plotted here, that is for the peaks for the MOO3, molybdenum trioxide. So in dry nitrogen, we see increase in the MOS2 peak, indicating that there is structural reorientation of the MOS2 going on, and then very little degradation, like very small degradation with the formation of MOO3, whereas in case of an ambient air, we see that at 5 Newton, there is a sudden increase in the moly trioxide peak. And also simultaneously, if you look at the GO peaks, this is the intensity ratio of IG by ID, where we can see in dry nitrogen, it's working fine, but in the ambient air after 5 Newton, just exactly where we saw the formation of MOO3, the GO peak are disappearing. As per the previous literature, they show that the MOS2, this is for thin film MOS2, has a lower friction, but moly trioxide has a higher friction. And this is what happening, we believe, is that at a higher contact pressure, there is a slow disintegration of a graphene oxide that leads to the precipitation of this MOO3 and then eventually degradation of the coating. So the mechanism that we think here is GO basically acts as an encapsulation mechanism, which protects the degradation of the sulfur in the MOS2. And then and when you put higher energy into the system, like high contact pressure and high sliding speed, there is a recrystallization orientation of the MOS2, and that's why we are getting a nice friction because of the sliding of the MOS2 lanes against each other. But as you go into the air, I think there is a degradation of the geo that happens with time, and then once the geo cover is gone, that's where I think we see the failure. So nevertheless, I think we see a very interesting mechanism of protecting the MOS2 by using a geo and much higher lifetime in terms of as compared to the thin film coating. Now the question is how we can utilize this coating for real practical application, and that's where there was this interesting opportunity to work with the industry collaborators through the DOE's technology commercialization program. And then, we got this program through the DOE and we worked with the metal stamping, industry. And then I'll talk a little bit about the metal stamping here first. Every car that you are driving right now, that is stamped. And if you see in every car, there is upwards about 40% of the automobile parts are hot stamped. And then there are individual pieces, doorknobs, and all those things up to about, there's a 450 million of those per year. And then the projected growth is about 180 billion. So, and this, the stamping metals ranges from different, mostly aluminum alloy or, boron steel. And then the temperature for stamping varies from 230 to 970 degrees centigrade. And there are various kinds of different lubricants which are developed, to work at those temperature. Now, why this stamping, needs a lubricant? Because when you're actually making a shape of a certain size, then you need to pinch the metal so the metal get thin. But without the absence of a lubricant, the thinning will be uneven, and that gives rise to the uneven mechanical properties. So in case of a crash, the tear will happen where there's an unevenness or the defect. So that's why they use different kind of lubricants so that even thinning is possible all across the chassis without the formation of any defects. Now, most of the times, for the low temperature, are using the oil, based lubricants, and then that requires a lot of post-processing to remove the oil contamination, and that's where the cost comes in, and the environmental factor where the waste product has to go into the environment. So there's a lot of interest in developing a lubricant, which could be washed away just with water easily, biodegradable, and can work at a very wide temperature range from low temperature to high temperature. And that's the reason why we are looking at this lubricant that we have developed in our process. So this was a 24-month, it basically extended to almost 3 years. But this was a very vast program in going from the lab scale to the actually industry scale. As you can see, we started with a pin on disc type of test, and then went for large area, then the stamping, and then real application on the shop floor. So of course, I'm not going to show you the results at each cases, and then some of the things I cannot show you because of the the requirement from the industry that we are working with the proprietary. So some of the things which are reportable to the DOE, that's what public to the common to the public that I'm showing you. So this is a twist compression testing system where you have a cup, you have a specimen, you apply pressure and then twist it certain sliding distance and then look at the friction coefficient. So this is aluminum alloy at 230 degrees Celsius. And then you can see on your right hand side, this is the commercial lubricants, and this is a graphene-based lubricant that we have developed, that basically outperform this commercial lubricant. And then we go to the higher temperature, again, comparison with the commercial lubricants, almost 50% lower than the commercial lubricants that we have seen here. And then this is at much higher temperature, 930 degrees Celsius. And then we are comparing here with the boron nitride lubricant. So basically our lubricant performs a little bit better than the boron nitride, but this is very, very expensive lubricant, and then it requires a lot of post-processing to remove this lubricant. So that's why I think our lubricant outweighs all the other things that the other commercial lubricants basically provide. Now, the other important thing that I already mentioned here is the availability, ease of removal. So in this case, just by water jet, method, we are able to completely remove the lubricant, and this is the Raman spectra of this, specimen without showing any signature of the, graphene or other things on the surface. So basically, no post-processing required, just simple water jet can remove all this lubricant very easily. Now, going from the lab scale to the industry scale, so this process is involves going, heating the blank to the 800 to 1000 degrees Celsius, then spray coating here, and then stamping at high temperature. And this is actually the area of the block, and this is blurred intentionally for these industry people. And then this is actually the block, the die that of a very large size, and where we develop the spray coating process to coat it, evenly everywhere, and then it goes to the stamping process, and this is the final product. Again, this is blurred intentionally, but what we have shown here is that there is a 29 to 46% improvement in the metal thinning process, about 4 times improvement in the standard deviation that leads to the lower number of parts being rejected. So that means increasing the productivity and improving the efficiency. This already has a 2 granted patents and got the R&D 100 finalist award. But it was really interesting to see the journey of this technology right from simulation, lab testing to the actually shop floor and giant system where this thing happens and see that it working nice, and how nanomaterials are making such a big change in a big way in the automotive industry. Now I will quickly talk about the other application, which is in the oil and gas industry. So this is similar kind of a TCF grant and working with the industry. So John Crane was the company that we work with them. And just quickly a few words about the oil and natural gas industry. So this is an offshore platform that you probably have seen in some of the movies and things where they excavate the oil and natural gases, and then main problem here is the pump and compressor that they use. It has to operate at very high contact pressure, very severe environmental condition, and there is always failure and then leakage of this environmental hazardous gases like methane, and some of those are greenhouse gases. So if you see the APA estimates, there is a huge amount of greenhouse gases that went into the atmosphere here alone in the US. So that's a significant concern. And there are different ways that people work around it. The conventional way is use of silicon carbide seals coated with diamond-like carbon. But this is a costly process, and plus after certain years you have to remove it and then replace, or downtime and all those things are important. So they're looking for a solution for this, and that's where we utilize our lubrication technology, which is developed again going from lab scale, where the requirements of the friction coefficient and the ball wear rate about less than 0.05 in dry nitrogen, and then ball wear up to 10 to the -8. So what you're looking at here is the silicon carbide against silicon carbide, which is their normal seals. And then we develop 2 types of lubricants here, and that definitely shows much lower friction. And this is the conventional DLC coated that sits here. So we see basically 16x improvement here. And then this is the ball wear rate. Here again, we see one of the lubricants, both the lubricant, of course, pass the test. And then if you look at the wear on the disc, here in one case, we see about 16x improvement. So, so what we have seen is the type of lubricants we develop, we actually pass the screening test, and then that's where, we move to the next step. Of course, I unfortunately, I don't have time to go through all the process in the last 2 to 3 years of this project timeline, and this is a lot of interesting endeavor for us coming from the basic science background, talking with the engineers, in the company. But this is the, towards the end, what actually in the real practice, when they do this testing, this silicon carbide seals against silicon carbide seal, coated with this special lubricant, what we have seen is this torque is reduced by 80% in dry nitrogen, and whereby 3 times, where in case of air, it's 85% reduction. So this is a significant improvement. And then, basically the adhesion, of course, needs to be improved. And that is easily, taken care by adhesion promotion layer. But this is a significant improvement over the DLC coated silicon carbide seals. And then this was again successfully, project completed, and the technology is now available for licensing, where we can show that there is a significant benefit of utilizing this, dry lubricants that replaces the conventional other lubricants, and then that help considerably in reducing the emission of the GHG gases, and also, the reduction in torque directly relates to the saving energy and then the cost. Now, the question that you might ask is, the graphene, of course,
we're gonna have to. It's about 35 minutes now.
Yeah, this is my last slide. Sorry. And then we are also working on converting the plastic into the graphene to reduce the cost. This is the project with one of the CNM user from Rice University, where we clearly show the graphene cost can be reduced, and then something like plastic, you can convert into the graphene. So this is my conclusion slide, summary slide, where we show that this lubricant could be utilized in variety of application, ranging from the metal stamping to the green to the oil and gas industry. And I think this is a great alternative going for the oil-based lubricants. And to acknowledge the grants from the various LDRDs as well as the TFC project. And thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ani. We have time for one quick question. What's the ideal diameter of the nano diamond? And one of that initial example of the graphene wrap diamond, is there a known?
Yeah. So these are the detonation, nano diamonds. So their sizes are typically 2 to 5 nanometers. So very, very small, diameter there. And then when you produce it, it's very cheap also. You can actually, it's very funny, but they produce is they pack the graphite with a TNT and then, explode into a stainless steel chamber. Because of the shock wave and the high energy, the graphite converts into the nano diamond. So it's a very cheap process.
Awesome. Okay, thank you very much. I think we do have to move on. We're a little bit behind, but thank you very much. So the next speaker is Michelle Ostrat from Pajarito Powder LLC. She is an expert in nanotechnology enabled solutions to climate change, along with many other areas. So we're very happy to welcome Michelle here today.
All right, thank you very much. Can you see me and hear me and see my screen?
Yes, we can do all three of those.
Okay,
yes.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. So first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you today. As Gary had mentioned, I am Michelle Ostrat, and I'm the chief scientist at Pajarito Powder. We are an electric catalyst startup that is transitioning to a small business. And so in today's presentation, I'm going to be talking about 3 use cases in industrial perspectives on nanomaterials and sustainability. And throughout this, I'll be talking about some of the opportunities and challenges. All right, so the 3 use cases I've selected, and by no means are these exhaustive, but I thought they were interesting because it shows a lot of the versatility of nanomaterials as they can be applied to sustainability. So the first use case I'll be talking about on the left-hand side is the use of nanomaterials and nanotechnology to be able to enable the hydrogen economy. The middle use case, or the second use case, I'm going to be talking about how nanomaterials can be used to be able to make industrial operations much more sustainable. And in the third use case, I'm going to be talking about how we can use nanomaterials to be able to more sustainably use our natural resources. So if we go to the first use case, this is all about near-term opportunities to help enable the hydrogen economy. As I had mentioned before, Pajarito Powder is an electrocatalyst startup, and we're very interested in being able to develop catalyst materials for both electrolyzers and fuel cells. And so electrolyzers can play a really critical part of being able to enable the hydrogen economy through the electrolysis of water. And we can use renewable energy inputs to be able to drive many of those reactions. We're also very interested in developing fuel cell catalysts. One of the most exciting opportunities is really to enable fuel cells for the heavy truck transport industry. And of course, there are other opportunities to be able to use nanomaterials in the hydrogen economy to support industrial decarbonization, including things like ammonia conversion into hydrogen. All right, so just very, very briefly, I wanted to go through a couple of examples of the different types of electrocatalysts that are of interest in the electrolyzer and fuel cell areas. These are some materials for PEM, and you can see on the left-hand side, we have a lot of iridium-containing materials for an electrolyzer anode. I'm going to be talking a little bit about iridium because there's a lot of opportunities and challenges associated with these materials. And in the middle, you'll see for the cathode for the electrolyzer, as well as the anode for the fuel cell. And then also the cathode, we see a lot of platinum materials, platinum alloys, platinum black, and we also see some supported materials. So these are engineered catalyst support materials, and I'll be talking about those as well. And just for completeness, I've highlighted some of the additional examples when you start looking at the alkaline systems, where we can start getting in some precious metal-free materials, including things like the nickel cobalt ferrite materials, and also things like nickel moly. So just as an example of a project that we have been working on in collaboration with GM and the Million Mile Fuel Cell Truck Consortium, looking at being able to optimize our catalyst support, catalyst interactions in some of these complex fuel cell heavy duty applications. And on the right-hand side, I'm just giving you a couple of examples of some of the types of considerations we have to be able to engineer very effective catalyst supports, as well as engineer very effective catalysts. So for example, in here, we're very concerned about the pore size for our catalyst support materials. If what you want is accessible mesopores, but you also want them to be able to enable very good oxygen transport into and out of these materials. From a carbon particle size perspective, we're very interested in being able to develop supports that have very short oxygen pathways, as well as supports that can facilitate very high catalyst dispersion. The lower right-hand corner, you see a lot of emphasis we put on surface functionalization of our catalyst supports. And this is really to be able to improve things like ionomer distribution that improves the overall performance of our fuel cells. And then on the lower left-hand side, really looking at the importance of being able to effectively anchor our metal catalysts to be able to largely prevent agglomeration of these catalyst particles as they are used in many, many cycles. So I'm going to spend a couple of minutes just talking about our engineered catalyst supports, because these are very, very important materials for both the basically in the fuel cell as well as in the electrolyzer type applications. But here we've developed capabilities to produce these carbon supports with very, very high surface areas, which you can imagine is going to be ideal in these situations. And then also very controlled pore sizes from 5 nanometers to 50 plus nanometers. And on the right-hand side, you can see we've actually engineered mesoporous structures as well. So we've got a combined pore sizes are around 5 to 8 nanometers, and then also 15 to 50 nanometers. And so these characteristics of our supports are very, very important to give our catalyst materials their best functionality. With those catalyst supports, what we do is then deposit platinum or platinum alloys onto these materials. And this is an example of some of our 30 weight % platinum that's been deposited on our engineered catalyst support. And you can see extremely good distribution throughout the entire carbon support, typically looking at particle sizes, and this is done in collaboration with Oak Ridge National Lab. Particle sizes averaging about 3.5 nanometers, and really just demonstrating the quality and effectiveness of the platinum deposition onto these materials. So how do they perform in application? So this is again some information that was collected at GM as part of our DOE project award in this area. And what you can see, for example, is that after 30,000 cycles of accelerated stress testing, our 30 weight % platinum on our ECS material increases the stability of the materials, enables maximum current, and also improves the efficiency at 2 amps per centimeter squared. And so what we have is some very, very good performing materials. And again, I would go back to the nanomaterial and sustainability issue. It's really important to be able to control both the support for these materials as well as the catalyst characteristics themselves to be able to achieve some of these really exciting results. Moving now a little bit to the iridium oxide work. Again, very important in the electrolyzer anode area. And here we've spent a lot of work, trying to develop and also scale up iridium oxide synthesis from about 15 grams to 250 grams. As many of you may know, iridium is a pretty difficult material to work with. It's very it's very acid stable and other characteristics that make it ideal in electrolyzers, but it can also lead to some somewhat challenging chemistries. Here we've achieved very, very high surface areas of our iridium oxide, which again lends itself to being able to more effectively use this very, very expensive material. And we've also achieved very good crystallite sizes of about 2.5 nanometers in our materials. So why is this important? Well, when we put these into electrolyzers and elevate the temperatures and the different current densities, what we see is that our high surface area iridium oxides are actually showing remarkable stability even over about 1,400 hours of testing. I also wanted to mention that because iridium is a very, very precious metal, and it's more rare than platinum, we're also looking at opportunities to be able to thrift iridium, which means being able to use less of it per square centimeter of a device. And there we can incorporate other types of materials such as ruthenium or niobium. And these have very additive impacts, not just reducing the amount of iridium, but they also interact very favorably with the iridium oxide materials. On the right-hand side, we've got a polarization curve that's looking at the baseline material. This is a non-high surface area iridium oxide that's commercially available, not by Pajarito, but by another organization. And then the high surface area material that we make at Pajarito Powder, as well as some of our iridium and niobium included materials. And what you can see here is that our high surface area iridium oxide actually has the best performance of these, but our ruthenium and niobium containing materials also performs quite well. So a couple of the challenges is, why are we focused on making catalysts better? Well, for many reasons, but I've provided 2 here in this example. On the left-hand side, the fuel cell catalysts, if you look at the cost of the catalyst in proportion to the rest of the stack, you'll notice that the catalyst cost is about 41%. So obviously, if we want to make fuel cells more economical, we need to be able to drive these costs for these catalysts down. That means either making them more effective, being able to tailor the surface area or the chemistry to be able to use less catalyst per fuel cell, or be able to drive down the manufacturing cost. And on the right-hand side, in the electrolyzer catalyst, this is specific for iridium. The iridium supply is finite and largely insufficient for the expected demand of iridium as we really move towards more fully commercializing the electrolyzer market. We expect actually that the cumulative iridium demand is going to not be sufficient for the supply of iridium is not going to be sufficient to meet the demand. And so we are really challenged in this area to be able to achieve greater performance with our iridium oxides, either through a higher surface area, more controlled catalyst surface states, being able to thrift iridium, substituting in ruthenium or niobium, for example, and also recyclability. So just to summarize this first use case, really in this area, I would say some of the challenges and also the opportunities are in being able to really manage the supply chain and recognizing that we are dealing with some very critical minerals and their limited availability. From a nanomaterials perspective, there's a lot of opportunities to really formulate these into some pretty interesting ways to be able to make the catalyst both active and durable. Recognizing, of course, that there are a lot of trade-offs between performance and costs. So in many cases, we may decide to go with a lower performing catalyst if it is more cost effective for the overall device. And a challenge for a small business is that the development and validation of these catalyst materials at scale is very, very costly. So when you make a batch that doesn't meet specifications, it's a lot of money in precious metal content. So again, we're very interested in being able to look at recycling some of that material as well. So if I go on to the next use case, this one's a very different example. This is looking at being able to use nanomaterials to be able to enhance the sustainability of industrial energy usage. And so in 2021, the US energy consumption by sector in the United States indicates that about 35% of our energy consumption goes into industrial energy usage. And separations themselves consume about half of that industrial energy that is required. Now, polymeric membranes are an interesting use case because they can often use up to 90% less energy than other separation processes, including distillations. And so if you think about the 35% of US energy that goes to support industrial energy needs, 50% of that is used to perform separations. This 90% less energy is a very, very compelling opportunity to be able to make the industrial energy use much more sustainable than it is today. Typically, a gas separation as well as reverse osmosis membranes operate on a solution diffusion mechanism, not on pore flow. So I'm not for people who may not be in the membrane area, I think conceptually a lot of people think that membranes operate on these pore flow where you have a certain pore size, for example, and a molecule or a particle that's too big to fit through the hole doesn't go through the membrane. But these gas separation membranes operate on a solution diffusion mechanism, which is quite a bit different. And so this works by having materials not just be separated out by their size, but also by their ability to condense onto and into and then move through these membranes where they are then filtered through. So within these polymer membranes, being able to control the polymer free volume is really important. There's a number of ways to do that, but what I'm going to be doing in this talk is focusing on the role of fillers in these materials. And of course, being in nanomaterials and sustainability, I'm going to be talking about some nanoscale fillers. So when you incorporate polymers and inorganic materials, and in this case, I'm going to be talking about MOFs, what you do is you're incorporating the benefits of polymers and the benefits of inorganic materials, and you're combining those into a composite to be able to make a mixed matrix membrane. Now, I think MOFs in membranes have gotten somewhat of a bad rap because it's very important to be able to control the interface of the polymer and the MOF. If you don't do that, you basically get a lot of defects in these mixed matrix membranes that lowers the transport performance. Additionally, you need to be very concerned about the size of these MOF particles to be able to make sure that they don't get too large in these systems as well. So we developed when I was at Aramco a number of synthetic steps to be able to modify and customize MOF nanoparticles using chemical modulators that really were able to control the high nucleation rate of some of these MOFs, these H-cust MOFs, and be able to basically control their size and cap their crystalline growth. And so what we see in the XRD is that there is no difference in the crystalline identity between bulk and branched MOF materials. But when you look at the particle size of these on the right-hand side, you notice that the bulk materials are about 900 nanometers. But by using these chemical modulators and capping the crystalline growth, we're able to achieve much smaller overall MOF particles. They're also branched in morphology, which is very interesting. And so when you combine these materials with a polymer matrix, in this case, we used 6-FDA DAM, what you notice is the bulk materials produce an opaque film, whereas the branched nanoparticles are producing a more transparent film. And when you look at the cross-sectional interface of these materials, you can see that the bulk materials in general are agglomerating and basically settling out when the film is cast. And that leads to poorer performance of the overall membrane. And it also leads to the fact that these are opaque materials. Whereas the branched materials are much more uniformly dispersed throughout the entire membrane, really making these some pretty effective mixed matrix membranes. When you do a FibSim on these, you notice for the bulk materials, a lot of voids. This is not a good thing for membranes that are based upon a solution diffusion model. And it leads to a lot of non-selective transport. So basically, any material is able to flow through those voids. So your membrane is just not selectively separating anything. Whereas when we look at the cross-section of our branched materials, you see a much more uniform structure that doesn't have these voids. You also have a highly percolated structure of these nanoparticles, which really enhances the gas transport properties. And so just some results on this use case, being able to compare the bulk versus the branched. A couple of things I'll first point out is that the individual polymers themselves, when you see an increase in the permeability as a function of gas pressure, particularly for CO2 permeability, it means that these membranes are plasticizing. So the environment that they're in is actually causing them to chemically get modified. And as you increase the loading of the bulk structures, you see a little bit of improvement, but you're still seeing a lot of plasticization of these materials. Whereas when you look at the branched MOF materials, with an increased loading to 10%, 20%, and 30%, you actually see a complete elimination of the plasticization. So these materials, particularly at the 30% branched MOF content, show very stable CO2 permeability throughout the tested pressures. And you also see that it doesn't plasticize. And so a couple of other things I would just like to mention here is, I think in some cases, people would assume that having the best performing membrane, for example, is what would make industry really excited. But in fact, what I found, particularly in working at Aramco, is that it's the predictability of the membrane. It's the lifetime. It's how the membrane ages and how it ages over 5 years or 10 years, for example. How consistent is the performance? These are more of the areas of priority that I was, sometimes surprised at. And, it just goes to, reinforce that it's really important to be able to understand what the pain points are and what the real, voice of the customer is in terms of what they're looking for in terms of performance of these materials, because it can mean a lot of things to, to different audiences. All right, and for my final use case, I'm going to talk about being able to use nanomaterials to increase the sustainability of our natural resources. And so this is an example also from Aramco. So zeolites are obviously catalysts that are used in a number of oil refining processes. They can be used in things like alkylation, isomerization. They're used in FCC and olefin upgrading, for example. So there are a number of unit operations in an oil refining process that use zeolites, and these are done at a tremendous industrial scale. Despite the fact that there are many, many types of zeolites that have been, developed or identified, there are really only 5 that are used on an industrial scale. And the reason why there are only 5, even though you've got a lot of different zeolites to choose from, it's because industry is valuing zeolites that are showing good stability, have good cost, and have acceptable efficiency. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about beta zeolite. And the reason why this one is of interest in the oil and gas area is because it's highly stable, and that's because of its highly ordered framework. It has very high acidity, which is due to its aluminum content, and it also has a pore diameter of less than 2 nanometers. But now this is where the sustainability point comes in. Not sure how many people in the audience know this, but from each barrel of oil, unfortunately, 12 to 18% of each barrel of oil is inefficiently used. This is material that is a very, very high boiling point. It's very, very viscous, very difficult to work with. It's called vacuum residue. And it's basically materials that can have upwards of 20, 30, 35 carbons per individual molecule. And it's very, very difficult to process these materials. And so basically what happens is this 12 to 18% fraction of every barrel is used in waste products, and it could also be burned for electricity. And that's just simply not an effective use of these hydrocarbons. And one of the reasons why it's very difficult to process these materials is because these aggregate sizes are about 5 to 10 nanometers in size. But I just mentioned that the zeolites that are often used in these refining processes have pore sizes that are less than 2 nanometers. And so what you have is a gap between the size of the molecule that needs to be able to go into a zeolite pore to be able to have chemistry performed on it, and the actual physical pore dimension of the zeolite itself, which then leads us to being able to engineer ways to make hierarchical zeolites. And so on the left-hand side, we have our traditional beta zeolite, which has micropores of less than 2 nanometers. And what the challenge here is to be able to engineer in mesoporous pores that basically can extend beyond 2 nanometers upwards of about 50. And that would allow these big, large asphaltene molecules that might be 5 to 10 nanometers in size to be able to actually penetrate into these catalyst materials to be able to have exciting chemistry performed. There are a number of ways to be able to make hierarchical zeolites. In general, they can be classified in 2 different approaches. One of them is a top-down approach, in which you take existing zeolite crystals, you do some type of post-synthetic treatment to etch away, leach out materials, or otherwise degrade the zeolite crystal to be able to add in new pore structures. Some of the opportunities for these materials include a pretty rapid synthesis, because you're starting from already made zeolites and zeolites that are already made at an industrially relevant scale. But some of the challenges include it's pretty difficult to control the pore size and the structure of these materials because it's not as precise as some of the other mechanisms to be able to produce these hierarchical pore structures. There's another way you can do this, which is termed a bottom-up approach, in which you take precursors, so seed precursors, and either hard or soft templates. You then do a synthesis, and the hard template, for example, gets incorporated into the zeolite crystal. And then what you do is you burn off, you leach, you etch out the hard template, and you're left with this hierarchical zeolite. The opportunities here for the bottom-up approach include that there are many strategies to be able to achieve this. You also have some pretty good control over the mesoporous properties. But what some of the challenges are is that in general, this can be a very time and cost intensive process. And again, when you're looking at industrial scale for hierarchical zeolites, you really need to be able to make these at very, very large scale, very, very economically. And so what I wanted to do here was zero in on some of these hard templates. Some different examples of hard templates that you could use include things like nanofibers or nanotubes. There's also carbon blacks. There's a lot of different carbohydrates you could use, for example. There are some benefits to them and also some drawbacks as well. So I thought it was kind of interesting to talk about nanomaterials and sustainability and then pick nanomaterials that themselves are sustainably sourced. But what we found in our work on hierarchical zeolites is that we found a really great hard template material that's known as carbon nanocellulose. This is a material that is sustainably sourced from wood pulp. There's a chemical process to be able to extract it from the pulp and be able to basically make it into individual nanocrystals of carbon nanocellulose. So we developed a hard template hierarchical zeolite synthesis process where we take our precursor solutions, we add in our hard template. It goes through a dry precursor gel step, which then gets crystallized in the presence of steam, and you get your hierarchical zeolite. Some of our operating conditions are here. The mesopore size distributions that resulted from the beta zeolite included not just the micropore, the 2 nanometer pore size from the beta zeolite, but it produced the mesopore size of about 20 to 40 nanometers. But really very, very exciting is we were able to reduce the 540 degrees C weight fraction of our crude oil samples. 100% of it was converted, which means we were able to crack these very, very large molecules into molecules that were much more useful and could be put into additional downstream refining processes. And so just in summary, I hope I've given you a couple of interesting use cases to consider in that nanomaterials can offer tremendous opportunities to impact various aspects of sustainability, not just in being able to, be devices, for example, in photovoltaics or other types of sustainable technologies, electrolyzers and fuel cells, but that they can also be used to more sustainably use our energy, particularly in industrial situations, and then also to be able to more sustainably use the natural resources that we do have. I would just take this opportunity to say that I think it's really important to understand industrial challenges and pain points and priorities and incorporating nanomaterials into potential solutions. And, throughout my career in industry, I've often been surprised that a lot of these important challenges, to me are not necessarily obvious. And so by partnering and collaborating with industry, I feel it's a really important and meaningful way to accelerate success in being able to develop nanomaterials that can enhance our sustainability across many different areas. And with that, I will conclude. My email is here, and I also want to call out Dr. Ben Sundell. He was one of my collaborators at Aramco, and he and I worked together on a lot of the membrane projects that I had highlighted here. So, Gary, happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Terrific. It was very, very interesting. Thank you. Let's see, we have time for a couple questions. I have one question, and I'm far from an expert in this field at all, but when I read my trusty CNE news, for the fuel cells to create hydrogen, is there enough fresh water? If it really scaled and was spectacularly successful, is there enough fresh water or not? Because
there are always challenges, right? Yeah. So I mean, you know, one of the areas I think that's got some great innovation too is being able to use not necessarily just fresh water, but how do you purify the water enough to be able to not have it poison the different parts of the system, for example. There's a lot of work that goes into looking at the different impurities that come into these systems. But it's a great question. It's a great question. I think it would, just my opinion, probably not be a good use to use all of our drinking water, for example, to put into heavy duty fuel trucks. But I think it's just an opportunity for materials to be able to start making these types of technologies even more sustainable and versatile.
This is Jelly. Can I ask a question? And you mentioned about the uranium oxide for fuel cell and for electrolyzer. And you mentioned that you have make somehow like a 30 gram or something. And what processor have you used? And can you talk more about your processing and how did you scale it up? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so we do have a proprietary process that we use, but so there's a lot of details to it, but it is basically right now a modified Adams fusion process. But we have done a lot to be able to optimize that for things like surface area, and also being able to incorporate different materials in. As you might know, iridium's a pretty interesting material to work with. It's got some pretty interesting chemistry characteristics that make it a fun material to work with.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Sorry, other questions? In the last example, I apologize, I wasn't sure when you talked about the zeolites and the larger pores, you're using that to I guess get that heavier petroleum products in there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand. Why is that an advantage over using the other 80% in those pores? How does that?
Yeah, I probably didn't. I didn't explain that well, Gary. So really, what you want to do is you want to be able to crack those large molecules into smaller molecules, because if you can crack them into smaller molecules, you can put them back into the other processes that are already dealing with the large that are already dealing with those smaller molecules. And so basically, you just want to get chemistry where you're breaking, carbon bonds, for example, that you can then re-input into other processes. The reason vacuum residue right now is it's basically just it's again used for waste or for electricity, is because conventional catalysts are unable to crack it. I think about the only surfaces that would be accessible, obviously, to these large molecules are the ones on the outside. But the majority of the catalyst surface area, if you will, is actually in these micropores. And so what we're just trying to do is increase the number of active sites that can accommodate these much larger molecules and crack them to smaller sizes.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, I think with that, it's time for a short break. So I'd like to thank Michelle and Ani and Elena and all of our speakers, John, this afternoon. So we'll take a short break. We're just a little bit behind, but I don't want to fall too far behind. So let's return at 3:55 instead of 3:50. So get about 7 minutes there. Okay, thank you everyone, and we'll see you in about 7 minutes. Thank you.